Hey guys, Roxabox90 here with another video in how to build an EDH deck. This one's going to deal with land and land bases in decks. So in a deck, we may have discussed this before, but you kind of want to have a good amount of land cards because they're the foundation of your deck. And in EDH, particularly where you need to have larger collections of land in play than ever before, you could have 12 to 20 land in an average game, maybe more. You want to ensure that you have enough and that you don't do too much, that you have too many lands because you need to get the cards you need, but you don't want too few that you get screwed. So generally the way it works when you're running a monocolor deck, you have fewer lands than you would have in a multicolor deck. This is pretty obvious. This runs even in standard, legacy, modern, the regular formats. Same sort of idea is still going, that you need to really consider your land bases and what type of colors you're going to be needing. Monocolored, you don't really need you don't need as many. I would run somewhere between the low 30s to mid 30s for monocolor in terms of how many. Maybe you have a 100 card deck, so 30 to 35. You could maybe cheat a little bit if you're running mono green because you have so many ramp cards to get you the lands you need, but even so, that's a bit sketchy. I would run probably between 30 and 35 for that. When you move to 2, 3, there's no real 4. There's very few 4, if any 4. I don't even know if there are any 4 colored commander decks. But if you're running, let's say 2, 3, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, you have to expand. So if you have 2 colored, you may still be able to get away with fewer lands because you don't need as many. You might run, let's say, 33 to 37, depending on your deck and what you're doing. If you're running 3 or more color, if you're running 3 colored, I would stick to 36 to 40, depending on how your deck is playing. And if you're running 5 color, I would definitely keep it, I think a minimum would be 40 probably. 38 to 45, I probably would give the range, and you kind of have to just work with what you have and see how you distribute your mana. But that's kind of the overall how you distribute your mana. Let's get into that. So let's talk about the basic lands. In basic lands, you have to consider that you're running multiples of them. While you may be able to get away with fewer basic lands in a deck, particularly in a 5-color deck, you can't really have as many of each. You have to have ways of mana fixing because you have so many colors. But even so, I personally think that decks should run more than less basics because there are lots of ways to destroy non-basics. There's plenty of destroy non-basic land cards. And there are also many ways to undermine basic lands. There are things like Blood Moon is a good example. It's a red card that turns all non-basic lands into mountains. Unless you're a red deck, your mountains then produce colorless mana, which is usually useless. So if you don't have a lot of basics to counter against those sort of measures, you're kind of in trouble. There are also cards like, I think it's called Ruination. I forget. There's a card also, another red card, destroys all non-basic lands. What are you going to do if you only have one of each basic in play? You'd be in big trouble. So you really want to run more than less basics. When you're running a monocolor deck, obviously the majority are going to be basic lands. You can check out my Omninet deck to see I run like 28 basic lands. Basic forest. 2-color deck, 3-color deck, 5-color deck. It depends. As you add more colors to your scale, there'll be fewer basic lands just because you have to have more non-basics to fix all your mana and get the colors you need. But I still would try to run, even in a 5-color deck, between 2 and 3 of each basic land, if possible. And in a 2 and 3-color deck, I would definitely recommend 3 to 5 of each basic, even if you have fixers and things. I find that it definitely helps you out in the long run. So that's basics. Let's go to our first non-basic. These are basically basics. They're basically basics. You have the cycle lands. So I'm going to be showing lots of different types of lands. I don't have all of them, at least not in front of me. So there are ones missing, and I'll mention that, there's ones for all the different colors and so on. So in this case, there is also a red one, but it's not here. Cycle lands, pretty much all you do is it comes into play tapped, and it taps for a color, the color. Green, white, blue, black, etc. You probably can see if I focus a little more. Yeah. The important part of it is that if you're running, let's say, a 3-color deck, having 3 lands that can come into play tapped, but will allow you to cycle as well. Cycling is you pay, in this case, you pay 1 white, 1 green, 1 blue, 1 black, whatever the card is, and discard it, and you may draw a card. So in EDH, drawing is a very important thing, as we've talked about. And you want, or as we're going to be talking about if we haven't discussed it fully in depth yet, so you want to be able to draw. So having a land option that also lets you draw is really nice. It might be a useful alternate for basics, for a basic land. If you have 6 of each basic, maybe you might want to put in some of these cycle lands because they're pretty useful that way. Next up we have the Vivids. They're kind of a little out of focus. Basically what they do, there's one for each color. They're the same sort of thing as the cycle lands, except they come into play tap, they tap for their color, but they also they come into play with 3 charge counters on them. You tap it, take a charge counter off, add 1 of any color. So if you're running a multicolor deck, it allows you for 3 times to add 1 of the color you need. They're fairly cheap cards as they come. These are a very, very nice pick if you're running a budget deck and you have multicolor, particularly 3 or 5 color. We'll go now. Okay. So let me zoom out slightly so you can see. All right, you have filter lands. That's what we call these guys. So the way filter lands work is that they tap for, well, some of them tap for a colorless. The ones from the Shadowmoor Eventide block, which are the ones up top here, the Twilight Mire, the Flooded Grove, the Wooded Bastion. They tap for a colorless, or you can tap a hybrid. Remember, these can only work multicolor because they have hybrids in them. You tap one hybrid, either a green or a black, to tap it and add a combination of 2, where 2 can be any combination of the hybrid color. So Twilight Mire is black-green. You can tap it to add 2 black, 2 green, or a black and a green. So they give you control of filtering the colors you need for use. Flooded Grove does the same thing for blue-green, and Wooded Bastion does for white-green, and there are others as well. There's basically ones for every color. So if you're running multiplayer, you can have 1 of them for a 2-color deck, or you can have multiples of them, depending on the deck you're running. Up top you have the Odyssey filter lands. They're a little less useful, but they're also pretty nice. You tap 1 colorless, tap it to add a combination of 2 colors. So you add a green-white, or you add a green-blue. So the point of all these lands are pretty much just to filter to get you the colors you need, which in a multiplayer deck is very important. So those are a little more expensive. The Odyssey ones are less so. So if you're running budget, go for those. If you're not running budget, definitely aim for the Shadowmoor Eventide, even though they tend to be between $6 and $15 each, depending on which colors you're using. So those are a bit more expensive, but if you can afford them, they're really nice to fixing the colors that you need to play in your deck. Then we have, in terms of fixers, we also have the, let me zoom out a bit, since you probably know what these all are anyway. We have fetch lands. So I happen to be lucky. I was collecting when Onslaught was going, so I have all the fetch lands. The old ones are very expensive, so many people can't get them, which I understand. You don't really need them because there are other options to fetch lands. You have basically, I don't know if I put out any, but there are things like Bant Panorama. There are from the, I forget what block it was, maybe the Alara block. There are these lands that let you search for a land of certain colors, and there are lists. In the list there are all the cheaper fetches. You have things like Evolving Wilds, so things like that act as fetches for you. But obviously these are the better fetches if you can afford them. So the ones on top here are the cheaper ones, although they're color coded, so you're kind of stuck. So you have Scalding Tarns, Misty, Rainforest, Arid Mesa, Verdant Catacombs, Marsh Flats. They give different colors: black, white, green, black, white, red, blue, green, and blue, red. And they come into play. You tap, you pay 1 life, sacrifice it, search your deck for either a basic, let's say Scalding Tarn's a basic island or a basic mountain. You pick one, go through your deck, find it, put it into play, untapped. Which is what makes it more expensive and also better than things like Evolving Wilds and many of the other ones that come into play or come tapped or come into your hand. Then there are the old school ones that are literally the same thing, they're just different color combinations. So you have green red, white green, blue white, black blue, and black red. So those can range in value. So the Zendikar ones are pretty cheap now actually. So if you want to start EDH, maybe try to grab them now while they're cheaper. And the other fetches from Onslaught are far more expensive, anywhere from $20 to $40 depending. So, and tying into fetches, there are two things. If you're running basics and you have a large budget, one of the basics can be replaced with a dual land from Revised, Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, whatever set you have it from. Those are incredibly expensive. They run, I don't know, $40 and up, and they go way up. But they are literally a basic land. They count as two basics in one though. So if you have a tropical island, it's a forest and an island in the same card. And it counts as a basic land. So if you have a fetch land in play, you can tap the fetch land to go find that land and put it into play. Which is why they're so sought after and so expensive, besides for just being old. The cheaper version of it, although also definitely not on budget, I'm only just starting to get mine, are the, I'll actually zoom in closer on this one, the Ravnica Shocklands. So they are basically the same thing as the dual lands. The only difference is that they tap for one or the other, so you can search for them with fetch lands. The only difference is they're called Shocklands because they come into play tapped, unless you pay 2 life. And if you pay 2 life, like a shock, then shock the red card, then it comes into play untapped. So those are the equivalent, cheaper version of the original dual lands. And in 2 life in EDH is really not a big deal if you really need it untapped. So there, I only have one, but they're for all colors pretty much. Those range on budget from $18 to $35, $40, which is much more budgetary, even though they're still expensive. So those are all elements of, so you have filters up top, which filter specific colors. You have fetches that search for the specific basic lands you need to get the colors, or the dual lands. The dual lands that can be searched for, the basic dual lands from Revised and from Ravnica, that will allow you to choose different colors even though they count as basics and they can be fetched. And before we go on to the next video, because this video is running long and I have to regather my thoughts, so feel free to subscribe up there. The next video will hopefully be over here, and the playlist of all my previous videos and hopefully future videos will be up here. So I hope you enjoyed watching, and the next part will be coming up shortly. Thank you.